Hey everybody, it's EJ from eyedesyn.com, and in today's tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how you can create cloth-like simulations using only soft body dynamics. Now this is a great way to keep compatibility between the dynamics engine and cloth. So cloth engine does not register with the dynamics engine inside of Cinema 4D. So by creating your cloth using soft body dynamics, it is compatible and can interact with anything else in your scene using dynamics. So let's learn how.
Voila! Look it! It's a sphere and a torus. This is what we're going to be creating today on our journey to utilizing soft body dynamics to create cloth. Fun little cloth stuff like this, as well as how to actually pull off this cloth and reveal something fancy and exciting like a sphere and a torus. So here is our scene. There's our good friends, the sphere and torus. Got our nice metal textures on here. And what we're going to do is go ahead and create a plane that will be our little cloth. So what I'm going to do is just make this 1,000 by 1,000. And then I want to give this enough width and height segments so this has enough geometry to create these nice folds. I'm also going to rotate this around a little bit, maybe make it a little bit of a slant, because this is going to help this fall in a way that makes some cool wrinkles and stuff when we actually go to apply dynamics. So what we're going to do first is, again, we're using dynamics. We need to apply dynamics tags to all the objects we want to be dynamic. So that's the sphere and the torus here. I'll right click, go to simulation tags and collider body, because we just want these to collide. We're going to use the static mesh shape, because if we just stuck with automatic, it's a very speedy, quick simulation, but it's also one of the least accurate ones, and it doesn't take into account little gaps and hollow areas like our torus here. So if we change this to static mesh, that's going to be recognized as the true geometry, but it's a little bit slower of a simulation. So next thing we're going to do is go ahead and add a dynamics tag to our plane object. So I'm going to go ahead, go to simulation tags, soft body. Now, you might be asking, like, well, why would you do soft body for cloth? There's the cloth NURBS, stuff like that. The thing is, I mean, I'm just more partial to using dynamics because I know the system, whether I know better, I know the quirks, and the dynamic system works with a lot of other things in the scene. Cloth and dynamics do not play well together. They're separate systems. So if you have cloth and you wanted to, play with dynamics, they're totally different tags, they're totally different collider tags, and they don't play nicely together. So that's why I've been trying to figure out a way to get cloth in dynamics, because I use it way more in my animations than I ever do cloth. So it's a compatible system. It's all in the same dynamic system. So that's why I'm kind of going through this. But, to each their own. This is, you're watching it, so we're going to learn how to do cloth with soft bodies. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit play and just see what happens here. And you're going to see that our cloth is going. And what I'm going to do is actually go into my dynamic expert settings and just lower this, because I actually had it cranked up. So these are the default settings here. And how I got here was just hitting Command D to get to your project settings, go to dynamics, go to the expert tags. We're going to come back here though, because we're going to need to up these sample frames for our dynamics a little bit later on. But let's just hit play, and you can notice that our speed is speeding up a little bit more. And you're going to see that with the default settings on our plane object, this doesn't look so clothy, right? It's fairly stiff. It looks like a very stiff blanket, maybe, or like a piece of plastic or something like that. So what we need to do is change a bunch of settings. So let's go ahead and go to our soft body tab here. And let's actually go to our collision first. One thing I want to do is just remove bounce, because of course cloth doesn't really bounce. So I'm just going to change this to like 1%. And then for friction, cloth does have a friction value. So I'm going to crank that up a little bit, maybe to 90. Now, a lot of this is just a lot of experimentation. Everything depends on stuff in your scene, but these are the values that I've found work best with what I've experimented with. So again, we're going to go to our soft body tab again, and here's all the values that are going to be important, all of these right here. So I've gone over a bunch of times what these settings do, so definitely check out those tutorials about soft bodies. I have an intro to soft body tutorial out there as well, but basically the only thing you need to know is the structural shear and flexion. These numbers here are basically the strength of these little springs that make up a soft body simulation. So if we think of the soft bodies as little tiny springs that connect our polygon edges here and all that good stuff, that's how all of these objects work. So the structural is the strength and stiffness of those springs, and the damping will actually help to let those springs oscillate less or finish oscillating faster. So if we have a low damping value, that means our springs are going to oscillate a lot more before coming to rest. So keep that in mind. So let's first go ahead and maybe bring the damping value to, say, 1%. So we're going to have very low damping. For our shear, we're going to keep this the same, but we're also going to leave the damping on shear at 1%. And then for flexion makes your, it's pretty aptly named, it makes your soft body dynamics kind of rubbery. And we actually don't want any of that at all, because again, we're using cloth. So what I'm going to do is just have a strength of 1 in my flexion, because we want a little bit of that just for the structure of it, but that's about it. And for the damping, I'll just leave it alone at the default of 20%. So with all those values changed, and the one thing to know with the shear is that the shear is going to help us create these nice little folds that we see in cloth, because shear helps the object to not fold onto itself. So if we have a low damping value in that, we're going to have more of the folds there. So you can see that we have our simulation running here, and we have some little folds happening, not a whole lot. And this is where we go back into our expert settings and we crank up the steps per frame and our maximum solver iterations per step, because this is going to help us have a more accurate simulation, and hopefully this will allow us to have more wrinkles and interact more with the geometry here. So you can already see that because we upped those samples, we're getting a lot more of the contours showing up on this torus and on this sphere here. So we're getting some nice stuff happening. Let's let this finish out here. So you can see we've got some cool stuff going. And again, we could also go up to our plane and maybe even increase the segments here. So that's going to be a driving factor with how this looks, how this lays on, and how much definition there is on the actual cloth object. The more geometry, the more wrinkles and stuff you're going to have. So let's just up it just a little bit to maybe 60 and 60 and see how this looks. And again, depending on where you position your plane object and how it falls onto the torus and onto these objects is gonna make a big difference with how many wrinkles you have. So I actually moved it a little bit, because what I want to have is this slide off a little bit. And you can see that when it's sliding, we're getting these really, really nice, sexy wrinkles happening here. And it's actually just sliding right off though. And that's not what I want, because it's actually going to slide off the torus almost completely, and that's not going to look so good. So one thing I'm going to do is go to my sphere and torus, go to the collision. And again, I don't want any bounce values here, so I'm just going to lower that to 1. But I'm going to want a higher friction because I want the cloth to stick to this a little bit more, have a little bit more friction and drag on that. So let's just hit play again. And actually, I'm going to just go into my plane object here. Okay, just want to make sure that I up the friction value on the actual cloth object as well. Looking good. Let this go. And hopefully that cloth will stick a little bit more onto that torus. You can see it's sliding off just a little bit, but hopefully it sticks and slows down there. Let's see how this is looking. Got some really nice folds. And it looks like our cloth is going to, because we up those friction values, it's going to stay onto this torus instead of sliding down it and just basically falling off. So that's looking really good. I'm digging that. Let's actually up our frames to about 90 frames. And I'm just going to play this out. Because the one thing I want to do is, now that we got this looking good, I'm going to let this simulation play. And to prevent us from having to keep playing this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, I'm going to let this play out and wait till the cloth kind of settles. Wait till this plane settles a little bit. So maybe right about now. And let's go. And what I'm going to do is set this as the initial state. And what that's going to do is, if I set initial state and go back to frame 0, you can see that this deformed state is where it's going to start from. And it's going to continue that dynamic simulation from this point. So if I hit play again, you're going to see that, okay, it's still undulating. It's still kind of interacting with our objects. And, we don't have to keep playing from step 1. I can hit set initial state again, and that's looking good. So I'm going to render this, and you're going to see some little jaggies over here, especially over in the corner there. And that's because we have such chunky geometry. I could have subdivided this a little bit more, but what I'm going to do to subdivide and smooth this out is use a cloth surface. And what a cloth surface is going to do is subdivide this based on the value you have here and try to smooth out all these wrinkles and stuff. And whoops. That'll happen sometimes as well, especially when you go to render. You might have a little bit of a glitch where, like, your plane, especially because I'm using a primitive plane and didn't make it editable, it's going to try to go back and kind of glitch back. But you can see that by adding that cloth surface, we no longer have those ugly, ugly jaggies. Let's go ahead and place our sexy, shiny metal material on this. And let me just go ahead and just show you what this material is. It's basically just a black material, got some very high reflection strength with a little bit of roughness and then a little bit of specular going on. Very basic material here. And let's just render this, see what this looks like. Cool. So we still have a little bit of jaggy stuff going on here. We could also go ahead and maybe smooth everything out by using a smoothing deformer and maybe smooth everything out a little bit. So you can do that if you'd like. I'm fine with it. This is just a tutorial. You're my client. Don't fire me. This is looking good enough. So now what I want to do is, now we have this really cool cloth laying on our objects. What I want to do next is utilize some other dynamic tools that will allow me to, like, pull off this sheet like I showed right off at the top of the tutorial. So what I'm going to utilize is some of these dynamic connector objects. And what I'm going to do is bring this up to where I want this cloth to be pulled from. So right about there. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and set this up so that we are not using a hinge, but we want this to be a fixed point. So I'm going to use the fixed type of connector, and then it's going to ask you to define two objects. So what is the object that is going to kind of pull on this, and then what's it going to connect to. So the object that is going to get pulled is the plane object. And you have where you want this to attach to. Where do you want this fixed point to attach to? And by default, it goes to the center of mass, and you can actually see this blue line going from where our connector is down to the center of the mass. And what we actually want to do is use a polygon point. And what I'm going to do is just scrub through the index, and this is the index of all the polygon points on this plane, and just go through all of them. I'm going to have to go all the way up to probably 1,000 and something. You can see how this is kind of going around and around and around, and let's just see. Looks like right about there is pretty close to where we want our point to be. Yeah, that's pretty dang close to where we want our connector to be. So polygon index point 1188. And now all we need to do is we've defined where the object, like where we're going to pinch the cloth and pull it up, is going to be right here. But all we need to do is define a object that's actually going to do the pulling that we can then animate to pull from this point that we just set. So all I'm going to do is use a null, and this will be our pull null. And actually, let me just go ahead and I'm going to right click and group object, so then I can have this null be in the same position as our connector. Let's do that. And then I'll just rename this pull null. That rhymed. And then we will just drag that into the object A. So this object is going to act upon the polygon point on the plane and kind of pull it and interact with dynamics. So again, we're using dynamics, and we have a dynamics tag on the plane, but we do not have a dynamics tag on this null. So if we go ahead and we try to, pull this with our null, you're going to see that nothing's happening. Nothing at all. And that's because our object that we need to have pull this cloth off needs to be dynamic and register within the dynamics. So what we're going to do is we don't want this to actually collide into anything or be a rigid body. What I'm going to do is use this as a ghost body. And basically a ghost body is just like a dynamic object that doesn't collide into anything, but it does activate dynamics on some other objects. But for now, I'm just going to use this just so it registers as a dynamic object. So now, with this pull null, with this ghost dynamic tag, love this little ghost icon guy. And what we're going to do is hit play. And now, what I should be able to do is move this null up, and this should pull the cloth off, just like that. Pretty cool. And one option I want to cover, and let me just undo that so our null goes back to its original position. What I'm actually going to do so I don't do that again is just freeze the transformation. So if I need to reset the null position, all I need to do is zero out these coordinates because the old coordinates are frozen down there. So what I'll do is just go into my connector here. And one thing you can do is adjust the region of influence. And what the region of influence is how much of a percent away from this original point does this connector get influenced? How many more points around it are influenced by that pulling? And this is fairly high, so maybe I'll make this like 8%. So that when I go ahead, and I'm just going to go and set some keyframes for my null, and maybe go 30 keyframes forward, and just move this off to the side, maybe move this forward, just move it off screen, and set some more keyframes. And now we should see our null pulling the cloth. And you can see that the region of influence is smaller, so it's not affecting as many points as it did before. And you can see this is now pulling off the cloth. And again, maybe these friction settings are a little bit too high because there's a little bit too much force, I would say, trying to keep the cloth on these little objects here. But you can see that this is now pulling off that cloth completely, even though our torus just does not want to let go, does not want to be exposed. And we're just slowly getting everything off there. All right, so now we got all of our cloth off. And now we see our original two characters here, our sphere character and our torus character. So again, always play around with these settings here. Again, maybe, these soft body settings, you might need to switch around a little bit more depending on like the size of your scene, depending on how many segments you have. And the great thing about this is everything's still live and editable, just using this plane object and stuff like that. Now you don't need to make keep this parametric. If I don't need to make things editable, I just don't like to do it. So that's kind of why I did that. But now at this point, you can just go ahead and cache this simulation and just bake it. And then you can go ahead and if you want to, you can retime it, all that good stuff. And then this is ready to render. And then you come out with something like I showed right off the top.
All right, so that's how you can create cloth-like simulations using soft body dynamics inside of Cinema 4D, and how you can use connectors to be able to pull your soft body object off of other objects. So if you have any questions about anything I covered in this tutorial, be sure to ask them in the comments section below. And if you create anything using the techniques in this video, I'd love to see what you're making. So be sure to share them with me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all those good places. Really great to see what you guys come up with. And if you like this tutorial, be sure to like, and if you've been enjoying what I've been creating here, be sure to subscribe so you can keep up to date with all the latest content on eyedesyn.com. I'd really appreciate that. And I, as always, really appreciate all of you out there watching this tutorial. I'll see you all in the next one. All right? Bye, everybody.